Good afternoon, and welcome. I'm Karina Rotenstein. I'm the producer of the TIFF Industry Conference, and welcome to our session, Glaad, from Watchdog to Resource. Yeah, it's awesome. Oh, feel free to clap anytime. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that today's events are taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are so grateful to be able to work in the community. Before we get started, just a reminder that there's no professional photography or video recording in the studio. However, we are live streaming the conference, so hello to our online audiences. And please, everybody here and online, do feel free to tweet and share the conversation using the hashtag TIFF18. Glaad from Watchdog to Resource is part of our Dialogues program, and I just want to acknowledge and thank Ontario Creates for their support of our industry programming. Today's session is part of our ongoing conversations about presenting authentic representations of marginalized communities on screen. We have been graced with so many truth tellers on this very stage right here, from Jill Soloway and Larry Wilmore. Yesterday we had Dr. Stacy Smith and our incredible opening masterclass with Tantu Cardinal. And so I encourage you later, after today's session, to go online on YouTube and check out all those conversations that have taken place here. Media moves. And in a time when images and narratives are fluid, manipulated, and the most mobile, and usually without context, the stories we tell travel around the globe fast, leaving imprints, shaping minds, and shifting laws. Some narratives move us closer to equality, yay India, and some to oppression, yeah. Fortunately, there are a lot of woke allies working in this industry who clearly understand that the role they play, whether they're an agent, a distributor, a writer, director, actor, publicist, critic, and curator, there is a responsibility, whether it is asking the right questions or stepping aside to pass the mic and listen. They are choosing to put the work in to ensure that on-screen depictions are told with dignity and respect through thoughtful collaborations with organizations such as Glaad, the largest LGBTQIA advocacy group in the world. This is not about entertainment, this is about civil rights. Today we have an incredible roster of guests, and I would like to just bring them out and we'll just get started. First, I'd like to welcome our host, Tre'vell Anderson, film reporter of the LA Times. Come on out, Tre'vell. Next up, we have Laura Kim. She is the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Participant Media. Under her banner, she's specifically worked on Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, Steve James' new docuseries, America to Me, and of course, the Academy Award winner, Sebastián Lelio's A Fantastic Woman. Next up, Joel Edgerton, writer, director, actor, whose film Boy Erased is premiering on Tuesday at the Princess of Wales Theatre at 9 o'clock. Welcome, Joel. Garrard Conley, the author of Boy Erased, a memoir of identity, faith, and family. Welcome, Joel. Welcome, Garrard. And finally, Jeremy Blacklow, the Director of Entertainment from Glaad. Please welcome our guests.
Hello, everyone. Karina, thank you so much. Karina and I met at another film festival this spring, and that's where the idea for this panel first came about. I'd like to thank TIFF Industry, for hosting us today, and all of you for being here. I'm going to start today's presentation with a very short slideshow, only about 5 minutes, to tell you a little bit about, to set the stage a little bit for why we're here and lead off our conversation, and then we will get to all of these wonderful folks that we have, because I know you want to hear from them. A little bit about who Glaad is and what Glaad does. Let's see if this works. There we go. Glaad, some of you may be familiar with Glaad. Glaad has actually been around for 33 years now. We began in the mid-'80s in New York City as a response to salacious headlines being written in publications about gay men dying of AIDS. A lot of the journalists writing about the AIDS epidemic didn't have the right words, the right language to write about what was happening. And that's when a group of activists came together and created what at that time was called the Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Glaad's mission is to promote understanding and to accelerate acceptance for LGBTQ people so that all people are free to live the life they love. As we all know, there's a difference between legal equality and lived equality. In the US, marriage equality passed in 2015 and became the law of the land. Canada, much sooner, 2005. But we all know that that wasn't the end of the journey. When marriage equality did pass in the US, we then saw the response from the right. We saw bathroom bills popping up against transgender people. We saw so-called religious freedom bills popping up everywhere, which we say should be called what they really are, which are religious exemptions. And since then, it's really been a game of whack-a-mole, trying to pop down all this legislation as it keeps popping up. So as we move on the road to lived equality, that's a very different thing. For the last 4 years, Glaad has been writing a report called Accelerating Acceptance. It was launched by our current president and CEO, Sarah Kate Ellis, as a means to work with Harris Poll to truly measure acceptance. And the way we set out to measure acceptance was by asking non-LGBTQ identifying people their levels of uncomfortability in a series of 7 situations. It might be a little hard to read those questions, but if you're interested in learning more about the report, it's online at glaad.org. You can see some of the questions include having LGBTQ members at my place of worship. How uncomfortable are you learning a family member is LGBTQ? How uncomfortable are you when you learn that your child is placed in a class with an LGBTQ teacher? And one thing we notice is that as soon as children become involved, the level of uncomfortability jumps up a bit. And as you can see from 2014 to 2016, which was the last year that we measured after marriage equality passed, the level of uncomfortability was dropping. In 2017, that changed. The level of uncomfortability increased. We all probably have a good idea of why that was. Something happened in the elections in the United States and a certain permission was given to hate. But for the first time, we saw these numbers slipping. We also measure amongst the entire set of people we poll how they identify. And as you can see here, by our polls, in this poll number, 12% of the US population identifies as LGBTQ. That is disproportionately affected by millennials, 18 to 34, who in our latest poll, we saw 20% of identified as LGBTQ. As you can see, the millennial generation is one not to be messed with. And when we start measuring Gen Y and even younger, those numbers go even higher. Every year, Glaad puts out a study called the Studio Responsibility Index. In this report, we're very well known for reports. We do a report in the fall that comes out about the television industry and one in the spring about the film industry. We count all of the LGBTQ characters, and I think it was around 109 widescreen studio releases from the 7 largest studios. And what we found this year were the lowest numbers for the calendar year 2017 that we've ever seen. Only 14 major studio films last year included an LGBTQ character. There was not one Asian Pacific Islander LGBTQ character in a major studio release in 2017. We've already seen that change this year. We know Crazy Rich Asians just came out, and Nico Santos' character is in that. So at least we know we're getting a little bit better. There was not a single transgender character in 109 studio releases, widescreen studio releases in 2017. And adaptations, especially from page to screen, often left out the LGBTQ identity of key characters. As you can also see in the US and Canada, 18 to 39-year-olds made up 38% of frequent moviegoing audiences. I already told you 20% of Americans 18 to 34 identify as LGBTQ. So for Hollywood to remain relevant, the industry needs to change further. We've already seen change this year, really exciting change in major studio blockbusters. Films like Deadpool 2, Blockers, and of course, Unloved Simon are working hard to change hearts and minds around the world in the depiction of LGBTQ lives. Indie film, doing just fine. We're all here at Toronto. You're all familiar with all the great LGBTQ representation in indie film, and this year is no exception. We're gonna see a lot of LGBTQ films tossed around for award season this year. Films like Boy Erased, Can You Ever Forgive Me, The Favorite. It's gonna be bigger than ever. But of course, the number of people who see these films are not as high as the people who see those aforementioned wide studio releases. So from Watchdog to Resource, the name of our panel today, I already told you about how Glaad's roots were in activism. Well, many people still live with the misconception that we're here to say tisk tisk to the studios and to slam down on them when there's bad or dangerous representation. But that's not what Glaad is today. Today, we are here as a resource to help films, and we're going to talk with the team from Boy Erased and with Laura, who works at Participant Media, about some of the ways in which we do that. And here are some of the ways in which we do that, and there are way too many words on this slide, so I won't make you read them all. We do confidential behind-the-scenes consultation, script consultation. I'm not going to read it all, but just point out some of the highlights. We work with talent to prep them to do media. We serve as a media outlet ourselves. We have a readership of over 1 million, both on our social channels and on glaad.org. We have a very broad email membership. We host the Glaad Media Awards every year, which we're very well known for, which take place in the spring in New York and LA. We set up screenings for influencers. We run for your consideration campaigns, and we write editorials in both mainstream and LGBTQ media. We're going to talk in a second about Boy Erased. We have Joel and Garrard here today. We're going to talk a lot about how they reached out so early on to Glaad to lock arms with us and partner with us about making this film as authentic and meaningful as possible. They didn't just reach out to Glaad, they reached out to several LGBTQ organizations to make sure they got it right. Hopefully, I'm sure some of you just came from one of the first screenings here at TIFF, and I have no doubt you loved it. It's okay to applaud. You have the filmmaker right here. Boop. And Laura and I worked really closely in the last year on A Fantastic Woman, and we're going to talk a lot about the road and what that looks like to driving that film all the way to its Oscar win and seeing Daniela Vega on the Oscar stage twice, which was such an incredible moment. We also worked really closely with Fox this year on Unloved Simon, which, as I already mentioned, was a film that so many people said they wish, so many LGBTQ people said they wish they had when they were growing up, that teens fell for, and that became a hit for families who are LGBTQ inclusive around the world. As you can see, stars of the film like Keenan and Alexandra came to the Glaad Media Awards and helped give grants to some of our rising stars at Glaad, and got really involved, and we ran an amazing campaign with the film to help create awareness for it. Another great case study in a film that we worked really closely with this past year was Believer, which I hope many of you have seen from HBO, which premiered at Sundance this past year. And it's a documentary that really, really worked hard to change hearts and minds. And for example, we did a 2-day lounge with them at Sundance this year, and saw them all the way through the second annual Love Loud concert that Dan Reynolds held in Utah this year. And that is it for now. That is my short introductory presentation. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, who you've already met, Tre'vell Anderson.
Hello, everyone.
For the LA Times.
What's up?
And I will let him take it from here. Thank you.
All right, so we want this conversation to be very instructive for you all in terms of being able to tell LGBTQ stories, whether or not you're a member of the community. And so I want to start with you, Laura. You all worked with Glaad on the whole kind of process dealing with a fantastic woman. Talk to us about those early conversations. At what point did you kind of reach out to Glaad, or did they reach out to you, and where it went from there?
I reached out to a friend of mine who was on the board recently, and so she introduced me to Rich and to Jeremy and to Nick, probably late last summer.
Late summer.
Yeah. And since that time, you know, we got them to see the film. We never really thought the film would not be something they supported, but we did want to make sure if there were any red flags or things that we weren't thinking about or aware of, we had them take a look at the film and give us their thoughts. And luckily, they were really, really supportive, and we started working very early on to sort of map out a plan to work together with the distributor, Sony Pictures Classics, and to find a way that they could really help support the film and really help Daniela feel safe.
And now with that situation, if I understand correctly, right, the film was already like completely made, right? And you all had it, and then you went to Glaad, right? With Boy Erased, it was, as I think I understand it, Glaad was involved from the beginning. Joel or Garrard, whichever one want to take that.
Yeah, well, it was sort of important to me. I mean, in the same instance that I was taking Garrard's book and presuming to then turn that into a film, that I needed his constant communication, support, and approval on even the finest detail. I felt like we had the same interest to do that on a script level, and then throughout production to get the support and approval of Glaad and other organisations. And there was, I mean, on this particular day, so I'm pointing to an old slide, when we had the purple Boy Raised T-shirts, when we took that photo, that was the same day that we had quite a number of journalists, not so much journalists, more bloggers and activists that came to visit set. And it was just very important that, for me, it was very important that representation was something that I was being very aware of. And it also just made me confident as a filmmaker to make sure that that we were, you know, doing the right thing by representation, and in turn by doing the right thing by Garrett's story.
So now, Garrett, I want to know, because I think it might be instructive for some of the audience members, what exactly were you looking for from Joel in terms of, you know, having the straight man tell your story?
I mean, the first time someone sent me an email, it was really surprising. I was like, okay, I just seen Joel Edgerton in Loving, and I loved it. And then I saw that he was actually behind marriage equality, like he was using the film to do that. So I went into the meeting sort of more comfortable than I normally would be with a straight man. I don't have many straight male friends.
Listen,
Joel has become like my closest one, honestly. He's a good one. So I went into it. He actually wanted to meet with survivors on that first meeting, and that was like, okay, this guy's real. Then he let me, well, he said I could write the script, and I was like, I can't. You know, there's a lot of sensitive material in it, and I just couldn't imagine, like I'd already written it as a memoir, so I couldn't imagine trying to Hollywood it up or like make it more accessible, which Joel didn't really do that either, but you know, I was like worried about that process. And so every single version of the draft, like Joel would send to me, and I would flag a few things, and we would have a conversation about it. And Joel like consistently listened and changed anything. Like it was kind of amazing. So yeah, I was skeptical, as one learns to be growing up, in this world as an artist. But yeah, it was like a dream team at one point when we had all those advocates and influencers on the set, where I was like, oh my God, like we've brought together this whole family that I've been following on Twitter and loving forever. Now I'm here with you, you know? It's really cool, so it felt like a great collaboration.
All right, before I come to you, Jeremy, I think we have a clip of the movie for those of you who haven't seen it yet.
Fun. Maybe.
Jared, I want you to do well.
So now, am I on? Yes, okay. So now, Jeremy, we've got two kind of cases here. We have a film that was completed once Glaad came in, and another that Glaad was involved in from the beginning. At what point is Glaad able to come in and assist filmmakers with their work? Where do you see most of them doing it? What do you suggest? How do they contact you all?
Well, in a dream world, it happens like it happened with Boy Erased, really. We're brought in at the script level and asked for our thoughts on the script. And that is happening more and more frequently right now. It's really exciting. It's kind of been a turning point in the last couple of years for us as an organization, where studios and filmmakers have thought of us for our input at that level. And I'm happy to say that when I got the Boy Erased script, it was already in great shape. I think I gave like one very minor note suggestion, but it was already in a really good place. They didn't, like I said, they didn't just come to us. They came to NCLR, PFLAG, Trevor. I'm probably missing one.
Born Perfect.
Born Perfect.
Oh, wait, they're part of NCLR.
Part of NCLR.
Yeah.
And really came to all of us. But getting back to the question, that's sort of the dream scenario, so that we don't get to a point where filmmakers have created a project and it's locked in post and it's ready to market and promote, and we see it and we go, We're not sure we can stand behind this film. It happens more frequently than you think. And, you know, again, getting back to from Watchdog to resource, I would say it's really a bell curve, right? Of, you know, probably, you know, this maybe 20%, I'm sort of making this up, of films that are absolutely fantastic, that we are going to do everything we can to stand behind. You know, 60 to 70% in the middle that are perfectly fine, and I'm talking about LGBTQ inclusive films, not all films, that are great and we'll do a certain amount around. And it's a very small end on the other bell curve. It's really maybe like 1% of films that we might, even less, that we might have to speak up against and say this could be actually dangerous. That number used to be much larger 30 years ago. But it's really the very rare project these days that we actually have to say this is problematic, and we really choose not to do that as frequently as possible these days. We'd rather stay quiet than speak out against something.
Can I just add something to that? Because I spent a lot of time dealing with studios and as an actor of various projects, and I've been involved in other issues regarding representation, you know, about race and the way studios have in the past, you know, made big mistakes about the representation on those lines. And I think the internet is doing a lot as well for studios to get this immediate backlash that power is in the voice and the fingertips of people, to give them that immediate feedback where they never used to have it before. So I think studios are kind of crazy not to look for appropriate representation where and how they can, and they'd be fools running those ships if they weren't having those meetings now, forming those kind of groups now for all sorts of reasons, you know.
Absolutely, and it's not gonna, if we don't speak up, it's gonna be LGBTQ Twitter, or gay Twitter, as we like to call it, that does. You know, we don't need to be that voice anymore in the age of social media, because the people are gonna speak. It's not gonna be us who takes the studio to task, it's gonna be the movie-going public. And with a film like A Fantastic Woman, just to see the other end, I mean, the film premiered at Berlin in February 2017, is that correct?
Yeah.
And it was just, in the case like that, the other situation, you know, it was we were able to identify it early on and say, oh, this is an important film. You know, this is a film with a trans actress of color playing a trans character of color with agency. And this is a film that, you know, although it was fully formed, by the time it came to our attention, we were able to identify early on and say, we're going to do anything and everything to hold this film up.
And now with A Fantastic Woman, I think it's interesting to look at that film as well, because it's a foreign language film in Chile. It was the Chile submission to the Oscars and eventually won. But I feel like that kind of international aspect might complicate or make the situation a little bit more complex in terms of the marketing of it, the conversations around what advertising and things look like around that. What were those conversations like?
Well, I think just to go back a little bit, we're also lucky that, you know, we made that film, and Jonathan King, who runs production for narrative films at Participant, used to be a board member at Glaad. And so I think that that kind of sensitivity is already built in, and coming from where we do at a place called Participant, we're trying to be sensitive, but we all have our blind spots. So I think because it's a foreign language film, you know, I mean, surely if it were made in the US and it was an American production that had big stars or whatever, we probably would have had that conversation a lot earlier. But it was shot in Chile, it's foreign language, and it's sort of one step removed in a way, and the audience for foreign language films in the US is a lot smaller than wide release studio pictures. And so I think it's, you know, that it even made a ripple, that it made a dent, and that people have heard of it, or that you even know who Daniela is a huge success and boon.
Mm-hmm. What does Glaad's work look like outside of the U.S. context in terms of helping foreign filmmakers, international filmmakers with their projects?
It's a bit limited. We've worked more in Australia and the UK than anywhere else. We connect more with individuals in other countries. We've done some work recently with an activist who lives in the UK but is from Nigeria, for example. We've helped set up sort of mini versions of the Glaad Media Awards with media advocates in China, in Italy. So there has been a little bit of international presence. But for the most part, it's what we're doing domestically to push out culturally.
And then now one of the slides that you mentioned was about like the lack of LGBTQ representation in like outside of indie films, outside of the smaller films like you were talking about, Laura. I'm just going to throw this out to the panel. We always have these conversations about representation and the importance of it. What for you do you find to be the importance of having authentic casting, having LGBTQ people a part of the storytelling, behind the scenes, all of that?
I can start, because I wrote like a 5-page document that I sent to Joel that I'm proud of, actually. I'm not embarrassed about it, where I was like, okay, we have to try to hire as many LGBT actors as possible, and we also need to really think about people behind the movie, and our co-producer David Craig was really helpful in that as well. Like when I wasn't able to be on set, I was like, David, make sure everything's really gay.
David's in the film as well.
He is.
He plays. David has been my assistant for about 8 years, and was associate producer on The Gift, the first movie I made, and he's a co-producer on this, and now we have a very confused relationship where he still sort of works with me as an assistant, but his responsibilities and his abilities have gone far beyond looking after the baby that I am. But he's been incredible beyond a producer on the film in terms of his performance in the movie. I think is excellent.
Who is he in the film?
He plays Michael. He plays my assistant in the movie.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
And he has also, with Garrard, been instrumental with setting up and producing a podcast that will, which I'm sure Garrard can talk about more.
We're doing. It's so wonderful to see like all these different iterations of Boy Erased. I mean, now we're working with the producers of Radiolab, which I've followed for like 15 years, and we're making like a sort of history of conversion therapy and doing a deep dive into the survivors' stories. And it's just been so great. I mean, to see how the project continues to unfold has been really exciting. But yeah, I mean, I wrote like that crazy document has, yeah. I've like sent it 5 or 6 times. So, but luckily Joel listens to like everything.
Yeah, I do.
It's great.
We had an amazing, let's talk about behind the camera. Just an outstanding crew, but lots of heads of department, our first AD, our costume designer, various people who are very out and proud, and I'm being careful about naming anybody in case not, but it was a big consideration. There was times when I couldn't get the person that I wanted in that regard, and I was not being absolutely stringent about it, but we did have an incredible community behind the camera. And then in front of the camera was a whole other interesting situation when it comes to, say, for example, casting the group of what we call the Love in Action group, the clients. It's a really interesting casting situation where you are sort of putting feelers out, saying we're really interested to find as many LGBTQ people as possible. But of course, some of those people are limited in how out they are. They're either out just to themselves or they're out to their parents. They have an agent who suspects that they may be gay or not. And so, but then we would have these meetings, and David and I, David, who I was just speaking about, have these meetings with all the people that I was very interested in. And I was interested in finding a cross-section, albeit predominantly white cross-section, because it represented the therapy place that Garrard went to. But creating these sort of identities for each character, even if they weren't prominent within the film, even kids that are sitting there silent throughout the film needed to have a narrative. I needed to know why they were there in the beginning, how they felt through the evolution of the days of therapy, and perhaps how they felt when Garrard's character is making his run for it. You know, were they happy for him? Were they going to cut him off in their mind? And a lot of those narratives, I know for a fact, represented the true lives of the people that I'd cast. And it made it all the more interesting for myself. It really gave it the path of least resistance for me, because I could just check in with people, and those narratives were very fresh.
And then just to add to that, I mean, it was sort of a dream experience to go on that set and meet Xavier Dolan and Troye Sivan and like all of these like gay icons that, you know, I've looked up to, and the feeling on that set just felt so safe, which, you know, is strange whenever you're going on set and you're seeing, you know, conversion therapy recreated, and during the breaks you're like, this is really nice.
But meeting your mom was the best part.
Oh my God, well, you'll get
And seeing her next to
never
Nicole.
mind.
She's
Has
here
she
on
seen it?
Tuesday.
Has your mom seen it?
No, she'll be seeing it soon.
Oh, that's incredible. That's going to be incredible.
Lots of mascara will be running.
Is your dad coming?
No, that's a whole other,
Another time. Soon, one day.
it's a whole other Q&A.
Eventually. Eventually. One of the things I love that you said, Joel, is about having, you know, LGBTQ people cast in a variety of different roles, whether they're speaking or not. And I know, like, with A Fantastic Woman, Daniela Vega was very involved with the kind of conception of the storyline and talking with Sebastian in terms of figuring out what the character's life would look like. And I know a lot of times when we talk about like racial representation, it's often like, why can't the Starbucks barista be black? Why does everybody have to be, you know, white? I'm coming to you, Jeremy, by the way. And so for this casting question, I think it's appropriate to bring up, you know, the conversation around trans folks being cast as trans characters, right? And we saw some hubbub earlier this year. And what role, I guess, what role of what service can Glaad be in terms of assisting with authentically casting particular roles?
Well, it's certainly a complicated issue, and every project, I would say, is extremely nuanced, and brings its own set of circumstances to the table. You know, I think we, you know, as an organization, say it's very important to cast trans actors in trans roles, and cannot, yeah, absolutely. And the reason why, for anyone watching or here today, that in case you don't know, is really two main points I'd hit. Is one, the playing field is uneven in Hollywood for trans actors. They have not had the same opportunities that cis actors have had. And moreover, having cis actors play trans roles perpetuates awful myths. Myths that having a cis man play a trans woman is that gender identity is somehow a costume and something that can be taken on and off. And we can get much more into the weeds than that, and I encourage you to go back and look at Variety's issue from a few weeks ago that we worked as an organization very closely with in sort of creating all that editorial behind that. And a shout out to Glaad's director of transgender media, Nick Adams, who was featured in that Variety article and has been working for 20 years in Hollywood on trans representation, and was one of the first people that Daniela spoke with when she got off the plane for award season last year. Nick has been sort of setting the ground for trans representation on screen for a long time. You know, it's tough to get into the LGB actors and LGB roles. You know, we've never said publicly that we feel strongly that in any way that LGB roles need to be played by LGB actors. Has there been hubbub on social media recently around it? Yeah, there has been. You know, people are angry, and I'm not here to say that their anger isn't legitimate. It's something that's changing every week.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right, we're going to throw it to you all out there for your questions. Don't be shy. We have two volunteers in orange shirts on each side. We're going to go with him right there first. Stand up for us, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what you just said, because I remember the Glaad Awards in 2015. they nominated The Danish Girl, which is like the opposite of what you just said. I don't know if you think that movie is positive still with Eddie Redmayne.
Things are changing quickly. I think 2015 was probably the last year that film could have gotten by with a nomination for a Glad Media Award. You know, you also saw Jeffrey Tambor being cast in Transparent around then, and Jill Soloway saying they'd never cast him in 2018, right? There's been a lot changing very rapidly. I think most people would say if The Danish Girl was being made today, Eddie should not be cast in that role.
Thank you. Right. Let's go here in the front, and then we're going to come to him in the middle.
Hello, my question is for Joel. I was just curious why in particular you cast yourself for that role as a therapist? Like, what drew you to that role?
What's wrong with you?
There is something wrong with me. Look, I'm drawn to interesting characters that are a little complicated. I cast myself in a very unusual role in my first film, and I've done it again with Boy Rose. I'm interested as an actor to explore all different sorts of things. There was also something convenient about being there for the first 2 weeks of the film and really kind of being a director and a dictator of events for a bunch of people, a lot of whom were kind of non-actors or very fresh. I found myself directing them in character at times if I wanted things to get done quicker, because I tend to be a nicer guy than Victor Sykes. I remember one time just kind of shouting at David Dittmore, who's a lovely man in the therapy group, who you see have a tear roll down his eye in the kind of credit sequence. And he was in the wrong place. And I just said, "What are you doing over there? Get over there." But in the character voice, it was fine. But yeah, I don't know why. I'm drawn to unusual people. And I found John Schmidt, who my character is based on, who was Garrett's therapist, who I met in Texas. I'd love to tell you more about that meeting, but I'd be giving away some fascinating aspects of his new life.
At a Cracker Barrel, no less.
At a Cracker Barrel. And again, David was with me, and yeah, he's a very complicated individual, and I was very drawn to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is, sorry.
No, you're good. You have the microphone.
It's either for Joel or Garrett. Obviously, there's a lot of hard scenes to watch and to re-experience, I guess, for you. Was there ever like one particular scene or one moment where before you started filming, you had to like take a second, like reassess yourself and, I don't know, kind of just think it through before you went in?
Yeah. No, you're bringing it up for me now. I don't really want to give too much away, but you know, if you've read Garrett's book or if you've seen the film, there's a particularly kind of tough experience he went through at college, and you know, you just got to. If it was a necessary part of the movie, because it's a big catalyst in Garrett's life and what eventually happened with his family, and I found it very tough to film the scene, and it's very tough to watch, but it's a necessary part of that.
And watching it for the first time, like with an audience, was very strange. But as I've been telling everyone, because I'll never live this down, Nicole Kidman was right behind me, and so she was like giving me a back massage during like the weirdest parts of the film. So it was kind of like, okay, this isn't so bad.
Did you get one yet? There you go.
Finally.
Hello, my name is Kimon Juno. I'm here with the Creative Mind Group. And my question is, how did you turn your personal experience into a story without falling into the trends of like storytelling within the film industry?
Are you talking to me? Yeah. Well, I mean, I trusted Joel. I know when I was writing my memoir, I was very conscious about not writing a trauma narrative. I mean, it's sad, and it's another sad queer story, because it's my life, and it's a lot of people's lives, but I didn't want to fall into the tropes of, you know, I'm writing this to make you sob, or I'm writing this to guilt you. You know, I wanted to show a real experience that someone who goes through conversion therapy has. And, you know, we're not just like these empty vessels. We have thoughts and feelings and emotions swirling around. And I think what's so great is like when I met with Lucas, we were talking and he'd read every page of my book and was like really into it. He'd marked up every page. And he just has this like vulnerability, and we had like really good conversations about the role and his own experiences. And, you know, Joel, when he asked like, okay, what do you think about Lucas? It was like, yeah, he has that thing with his face where like, you know, he can react to everything going around him, and he can have absolutely no lines, and you can see like so much emotion. And that was really important to me watching the film, you know, for the final version of the film, to say like, okay, maybe, you know, in that scenario, we don't have, you know, an internal monologue like we have in my memoir, but we have someone that we can clearly see has a personality and has these emotions swirling.
Yeah, and it's tough because, you know, you're talking about a film where predominantly the character has no agency and is swayed on the kind of very turbulent seas of everybody else's agenda, which, you know, is a very honest look at Garrard's period of time from being outed, not coming out, but being outed, and the ensuing years, and the agency is him now. And I, you know, good word of warning to anyone running a conversion therapy camp or doing anything untoward to anybody young for any reason is they may grow up to be a writer. And they will share their stories. And within Garrard's story is a bunch of characters who I just felt like Garrard in his book wrote with such an empathy for people around him who had caused him such pain. His parents on different levels, his mother and father, in being confused by him and in opposition to him and setting a path for him that was the opposite of what he wanted. And Sykes, John Schmidt, his therapist, and the organisation in general. He never painted anybody as a demon, because the scary thing about it in the portrayal of it is that nobody is sort of waving off the parents and the moment they're down the drive going, nah, and getting out the stick. Now, there are those places. That wasn't Love in Action. The scary thing about Love in Action, they really purported to have a success rate in the 80s, you know, and they were there to help, and everybody treated Garrard like it was almost like he was addicted to heroin, and we could turn this thing around. And to me, that's terrifying. So in terms of, you know, rendering the story, I just felt like I was a passenger to Garrard's life. It's like, well, if he had that empathy, I'm going to have that empathy, because I think then you'd be crazy to watch the movie and think that it was a 1-800 advertisement for conversion therapy. In fact, you know, the abhorrence is evident in even the most subtle details. Funnily enough, just as sort of a cute detail, when and it's great to see movies like Call Me By Your Name and Unloved Simon out there creating like really positive representations. And when I got to the end of Call Me By Your Name, I was watching it in Sydney, and I just got the cast together for the movie, and we were about to start sort of talking about... No, we'd shot it by that point. And there's that... Has everybody seen that movie, or...?
You're not giving away anything.
But there's just, I won't give away the beauty of the movie. But of course, there's that wonderful moment where they have the phone conversation at the end, and Armie Hammer's character said, "Oh God, if that was me, I would have been sent off to some institution." And I was like, our film is that phone call.
Oh my God, now we have Lady Bird Cinematic Universe and Call Me By Your Name.
Coming together.
You could have Armie Hammer just walk through Love in Action.
I wanted to follow up real quick on when we were talking about conversion therapy for a second, about just like the real world change that this can have, because we haven't really touched on that yet. I think your film is going to lead to conversion therapy being banned in more than the 14 states it's currently banned.
I hope so.
I hope.
Yeah.
Don't get my hopes up.
And it's going to happen. And NCLR and Born Perfect are leading the way on this. And I think after the midterms are through, you're going to see, because of awareness of this film, you're going to see this issue coming up in state legislatures everywhere, and maybe federally.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Unless we go on a listening tour and decide to just not release the film.
Have you heard that crazy stuff? There's a guy in California who went on a listening tour. What was his name? I should know all my conversion therapy facts right now. He's a gay politician, and they were trying to pass a ban to make sure that conversion therapy is seen as fraud. And he's like, I need to go on a religious listening tour, and he decided
to listen to the other side.
And he decided. I can't remember.
Does anybody know? I don't want to name somebody that it's not.
Yeah, he's a California.
I've been busy, so I haven't been able to look.
And he came back from the listening tour and decided not to.
He decided
submit
not
the bill.
to do it. And so I think this is actually.
No, I mean, he should have submitted the bill.
He decided not to do.
He decided not to go against the conversion therapy.
Because he heard from these religious organizations that thought conversion therapy was a good idea.
Do this. We had a film called Spotlight, and the way the Catholic Church is seen now and the way people treat survivors is so different, and I think that your film will do the same thing.
Yeah, I think Spotlight is wonderful.
And a fantastic woman led to Chile changing transgender rights legislation.
Wow.
We've got time for a couple more in the center.
Hi, my name is Karen King, and I'm interested in getting a sense of what your business model is for Glaad with these consultations. Is there remuneration that happens with the films and the organization, or do you guys just do this on the funds you raise outside?
We are a free resource to the industry. So we fundraise. We are constantly fundraising as a 501c3. Our development department is the largest part of our staff, and all of the resources we offer are free. So I don't know if that answers it succinctly.
Right.
We have right here. There we go.
Hi, my name is Sonja Farooqi. I'm an author based in Toronto. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for a very illuminating conversation. This topic is new to me to some extent, at least discussed so openly. I haven't really seen that, so that's very powerful. My question is for Joel. When you came across Garrett's book, what was it about this book? Were you evaluating a lot of books that you were considering, or was that topic in your mind and you sought a book on that topic? Or how did that go about?
There's a number of contributing factors to it. Actually, we were talking earlier that being involved with the film Loving is a big part of the reason I'm sitting here. There was something about both the experience of learning about that story and being really infused by my involvement in it with the subject of injustice, something that I've never experienced in my life. And then going on the road and talking about it at a time when Australia had not evolved far enough yet. It has since, but it was still, again, it's a yes-no situation on the subject of marriage equality. And it was very shameful to be out there talking about this stuff at the time and go, I always thought that Australia was more progressive than the United States, and in fact we weren't, and we're still not in many ways. There was that. I was interested in the subject of injustice, and then when the book came in front of me, I read it for different reasons. I read it because as a child, my biggest fears and the reason I would pray to God was to not have my freedoms limited. But in my mind, that was going to war, being abducted by aliens even. You know, like in my mind, it was like, don't take me away from my life and don't put me in prison. And I'd pray about these things. So as a filmmaker and as an actor, I'm really interested in prison stories, institution stories, stories about mental institutions and cults and so on. I've never been so excited to watch a film than Martha Marcy May Marlene when it was coming up. You know, I was like, oh, a movie about cults. And conversion therapy, strangely enough, since I've discovered, is by some people defined as a cult. I came to the book for those salacious reasons. Wow, someone's fly-on-the-wall experience at some mad religious institution, like a prison. What I found in it was such a story of kind of misguided love, a foundation of a family that was so, had so much love and yet so much confusion based on belief that I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm not someone who reads a lot of books and gets given a lot of books. I read a lot of screenplays. But for some great reason, this one I picked up straight away and I couldn't put it down. And then I wanted to meet Garrard. I thought I'd be involved in some way. I actually did have a point where I was like, am I the right person to tell this story? I couldn't believe no one else was knocking on his door about it. And I asked Garrard to write the screenplay, and then I was like, thinking about it every morning I wake up, and I started writing a couple of scenes while I was in Budapest shooting a movie. And it was like I became obsessed, and I wrote a very messy first draft very quickly.
And you called me like with these sort of crazy chats where you're like, what if we did this? What if we did that? I'm like,
I didn't even care about the time frame. I'm like, Jared, but nothing's overwhelmed me so much. And I literally, to this day, that was a year and a half ago that I first read the book. It's been a part of every one of my days ever since, because I've been writing it, then gathering the team, and not a day went by that we weren't doing something. And finally next week I'm going to go on a holiday and I can finally get this guy out of my head.
And this will be our last question right here.
This is a general question for everyone. As a young filmmaker who focuses on this, where do you think intersectionality plays in LGBTQ stories? Not only racially, but also representation of feminine male bodies. Just thoughts, general thoughts, and even in a studio context.
It's everything. It's the short answer. We need to tell more diverse stories that are a cross-section and a representation of every group out there, whether that's feminine male stories, trans stories, people of color, people with different abilities. I mean, intersectionality is more important now than ever, and just telling LGBTQ stories isn't enough. We need to tell everyone's story.
And also, as an actor, I've got lots of friends who, you know, there's this dream future. Obviously, I land in the seat of privilege when it comes to American movie making. I'm a guy hitting that period of my life where it's just, there's an abundance of stuff. I've got a lot of friends who I care about, who I hold on the highest shelf of excellence as actors. There's a world where they dream of, where it's not like, you know, I have a Middle Eastern appearance, so I just go to auditions where I play a terrorist all the time, or this or that. That you get trans people playing roles where there's no narrative around that. They just happen to be in the film playing a great character. That people of all different colours and shapes and sizes are just playing roles that they don't have to be there because the colour of their skin matches some sort of diabolical plot, if you know what I mean. There has to be just like Ruth Negga, who starred in Loving, is about to go on stage playing Hamlet in Ireland. And, you know, talk about Ireland being very progressive in all sorts of ways, that there's somebody at a theatre who's just like, I want to see that person play Hamlet, and to flip the narrative and flip the switch, and you know, I think that stuff needs to happen more in film in general. You know, logic aside, some cases too. I mean, obviously, if you go, oh, we've got a nuclear family and all this stuff, but for people to just be more robust in the way they think, and I know that's something that I will do next time I make a film, if I'm allowed. I'll be allowed. It's just that whether it's good or not, I can't promise.
All right, great. Well, with that being said, help me thank our panelists for joining us. And thank you all as well. I think we're just like a cold ending. So, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you to our guests so much, and thank you to everyone in the room. I'm really glad that we were able to have this very open and honest conversation. And please share the live stream share the clip with your friends and everybody online. This is a conversation we need to see. Go see Boyer Race screening on Tuesday, and Roma as well. And we'll also see you at 4:30 for our Mogul session. Thank you.